Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Friendly City Books podcast. Today, I am here doing an author interview, and I'm super excited to introduce Billie Winter and Hannah Murphy Winter, who are the co-authors and photographers behind this amazing anthology, Queer Power Couples. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Go for it, Hannah.
I'm Hannah. I'm a writer and a journalist, and I had the pleasure of making this amazing book with my wife, Billie.
And I'm Billie Winter. I'm the photographer of the book. And yeah, I guess it was fun making a book with my wife. I don't know.
I loved this book. It is, first of all, let's just take a minute to appreciate how beautiful she is. I love the color that you picked. It's so vibrant and eye-catching. And obviously, the photography that you featured on front is gorgeous. This is your perfect coffee table book, in my opinion. I think it's going to be a beautiful centerpiece for my future coffee table one day. That's my personal goal.
High praise. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's true. I really, really loved reading this, and I especially loved it's coming at a time in my life where I think this is going to do me so much good because I'm actually about to get married. So I get married on May 3rd. So as we're recording this, I'm literally a week out.
Wow.
And
congratulations.
Thank you. And this anthology is so centered on queer joy and, these beautiful, strong queer couples. And it talks a lot in the book about not having a roadmap for queer joy and for queer relationships. And I felt so privileged to be able to read this, just a few weeks before my wedding, when having a roadmap is kind of on the forefront of my mind. I feel like I was the target audience for this book, and I really, really appreciated it. So first off, thank you for that.
We're so glad that it got to kind of do what we hoped it could do for at least one person. That's really, really cool.
I mean, it was just the right time for me. And I really loved it. So, and also a lot of these people I hadn't heard of. And I was like, why haven't I heard of these people? So many of them were so cool. So I'm terrible, by the way, at names. So if you, going forward, may have to remind me of the names of some of these couples. But the one that stuck in my head was the Emily Dickinson scholar and her wife, who was the founder of that the LGBTQ studies program at the University of Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. Oh my gosh. We
My
could talk
whole
about
entire
that
heart.
photo shoot for this entire podcast.
I believe that.
They were so wonderful. It's Martha and Marilee are their
right,
names.
yes.
And they were such first of all, just a riot. They were so much fun to spend time with. And to be around two people that were that brilliant and that funny was such a privilege. They were just wonderful.
I can imagine. I was just loving that section in the book. Actually, when I first got it, I just kind of, thumbed through the pages before I gave it a true read. And that section was one that it just caught my eye, and it wound up being the first segment of the book that I actually read because I couldn't wait. I was like, I think I need to read about specifically the Emily Dickinson scholar. that just warmed my soul. So, and as a big classics fan, I've talked a lot about doing a classics segment of the podcast on my Make It Gay series to talk about queer classics. And one of the people I would have obviously featured was Emily Dickinson. And to think that, it's this woman's scholarship that has, really impacted how we see her, that maybe had it not been for her research, would I have even thought of Emily Dickinson right away? So that's just really incredible.
Yeah, no, it's actually finding that couple is kind of a funny story, if I can tell it.
Of course.
So to kind of backtrack for 1 second, the the reason, like it kind of, you not knowing a lot of the names in the book is by design, in the sense that we didn't want this just to be a book about queer celebrities.
Mhm.
I think once you get to a certain level of fame and wealth, your queerness is no longer like one of the primary ways with which you move through the world. And so that
Mhm.
wasn't compelling to us. And so when we were compiling names of couples that we wanted to reach out to for the book, we kind of like were casting our net as wide as we could, asking friends, asking family, asking just anyone that we would talk to, like, oh, we're working on this thing. If you have any names in mind, let us know. And sometimes people would be like, oh yeah, well, you should put my friends in the book and blah, blah, blah. And I would always be like, oh yeah, sure, whatever, being like super cynical about it and stuff. And when I'm not a photographer, I'm a farmer. And I was working with a neighbor farm, just like helping them out. And I was chatting with them. And the main farmer, Caitlin, I had brought up the book with her. And I said, if you know of anyone who, are having ideas of like, couples that we haven't thought of. And she was like, oh, actually, my aunts would be great. And again, I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And then she went on to explain what they do and who they were. And I was like, oh, wait, I'm sorry, what? Who are these amazing people? And so, yeah, we ended up like going all the way to Maryland for the photo shoot, where they live, and like hung out. And it was, I don't know, I feel like there are certain people in life where, uh, like, I certainly was like the person, the kid, the student who desperately wanted the approval of like the cool teachers.
Mhm.
And they both have that like vibe to them, like just like the cool, either like auntie or the cool like teacher kind of thing. And so like we were hanging out with them and I was like, oh man, I just like desperately want you guys to think I'm cool because you guys are so cool. And yeah, they ended up like inviting themselves to dinner that night.
It
So
was
I
great.
think we passed
Yeah.
the test, but it ended up being like an amazing hang. And also, fun fact, Martha, who's the Emily Dickinson scholar, she also makes a mean Manhattan.
I could see that actually. I don't know why, but she gives me that vibe.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh,
yeah, I love that section of the book, but it does occur to me that I feel like I haven't explained what this book is quite well enough yet. So we dove right in and I completely glossed over. So for the listener, Queer Power Couples is a photography and interview anthology talking about exactly what it sounds like, queer power couples. And I actually do have a question for you kind of about how you define what makes a queer power couple. But before we get into that, I just want to say the photography in this is gorgeous. The
thank you.
interviews are compelling. I really, really, really loved this book. But yeah, let's dive in to some question and answer style stuff. Okay, so my first question is uh, something that you do touch on in the book, but I feel like it's important for our listeners to hear about what inspired you to create queer power couples because it sounds like it was quite a journey.
Yeah, so it was actually a slightly unusual origin story for a book, I think. So in June of 2020, a friend of mine who was also a editor at Chronicle Books reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I've been thinking about this idea for a photography book about queer power couples for a long time, and I have no time to develop the idea at all. Would you have time to like pull together a book proposal?" And it was June of 2020, so I had literally never had more time on my hands than I did in that moment. And it was her idea to pitch it as book about queer power couples made by a queer couple. She knew that my wife was, well, not my wife at the time, got married in the process of all of this happening, but that Billie was a photographer. And so I talked to Billie about it, and we figured it'd be really fun. It'd be good practice to make a book proposal. Never considered the possibility that it would become an actual book that they would buy. But we sat down to make this book proposal, and the question that we started with was, well, why doesn't this book exist yet? And to understand that better, we had to kind of define what we believed a queer power couple was. And it was at the intersection of three things. You had to be out, you had to be coupled, and you had to be empowered to influence mainstream culture. And that was a really broad definition, which is also why there are a lot of names in there that you probably haven't seen. But it also, in looking at that intersection, it became really clear to us that the reason that this book didn't exist yet is because that intersection has only really been significantly populated for about 10 years. And so our intention with the book was to, well, originally with a book proposal we thought was going to go nowhere, was to explore what it meant to exist at that intersection, what it meant to be out and coupled and in the public eye. And that I think all of the questions, all the interviews, everything that we explored kind of jumped off from that question.
For sure. I actually really appreciate that these people weren't necessarily household names. Because you actually reference in the introduction, I think, this book, Queer Icons and Their Cats, as one of like few queer books that like is out there in the mainstream. That's all like queer celebrities. Mm-hmm. And I actually do own that book. So I was like, oh, that's funny.
So do we.
Yeah, it's an amazing book, especially for a cat lover. And like I said, before we started recording, I also aspire to have cats to go with my coffee table, probably to knock things off of it, realistically, knowing cats. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, that's so funny, because it's literally like, it's maybe two books down on my bookshelf from where I keep yours right now.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, perfect. So I thought you would be amused by that, but that was part of the reason why I wanted to, talk about the inspiration journey, is because you're right. There's really nothing like this on the market right now. That's probably the closest thing on the market right now. and it's more about cats.
Yeah.
And I'm not mad at that. As a cat lover, I'm not mad at that. But I think that this is definitely a very important thing too, that occupies just a very, very important space. So you already told me what and like how you define what makes a queer power couple, which was going to be my next question. And I think that that's such a great response. I could definitely tell that that was kind of what you were going for, just from the couples that you did choose to highlight. But one of my questions as I was reading it, because I know you went through quite a process to find all of these people, and I was wondering, like, is there anybody that you have heard of since then, or even before, that you like wish you could go back in time and feature?
Ooh, good question.
Huh.
There have been a couple.
Yeah, I mean, there was this, because we were asking for so much time and energy from people, there was of course like a self-selection process. Like, people had to want to be interested in engaging with some of these, pretty vulnerable questions, in a really public way and in a very coupled way, like really presenting as a couple. But there was also just the reality that we were working on it over the course of 3 years, but there was still the reality that some people just were like, we were never able to connect with, they were never able to make their schedule work. So there's, we have some like, white whales that got away, that like, maybe if there's ever a volume 2, we'd love to revisit. But like new couples or people that we've heard of, I mean, I feel like I spent an unbelievable amount of time looking to like checking people's relationship status.
Right. I'm sure
over the course of 3 years.
So much. Yeah.
And I feel like it was the very queer experience of, going into the personal life section of people's Wikipedia and just being like, tell me if you're partnered. Tell me. Are we partnered with someone cool?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I feel that.
Yeah. I will say that, like, I think that had timing worked out. There were like a few like really amazing couples in like the drag community that we would have loved to have in here that didn't make that, like this, the timing never worked out and we weren't able to, they weren't able to be in the book. It was, you know, we were like trying to make it work until like the last couple weeks and we're like, there's no time left. This has to go to the printer. But
and also a couple like some like wow, what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know.
Like polyamorous groups, like some
yeah.
like molecules. That's the word I'm looking for.
There were two poly. Well, we do. Yeah, I mean, there's one poly couple in the book, but
Yes.
they're represented as a couple. But yeah, we didn't get any. We did have to start the conversation with our editor about whether or not, like, how do we navigate if we did get a yes from a throuple. Do we have to change the name of the book?
I actually, you know, I was going to say that I loved that you featured different ways of being a queer couple. Like, obviously, you know, the majority of these people are married couples, but, you know, you also featured one couple that is separated. And also, you know, the polyamorous couple. And so I really loved this like wide range of representation of what it means to be a queer couple, because there's absolutely more than one way. And so that was something that I thought was very powerful and very important, especially that you featured a separated couple. I thought that was very interesting and something that I was not expecting when I was reading it.
Yeah, you're referring to Sean and Terry, and they were, if not the first, one of the earliest couples to say yes to being in the book. And when they responded to our outreach, they said like, "Oh, hey, just a heads up, we're separated, but we would still be interested in being in, you know, in this project if it makes sense for y'all." And we had that conversation of like, "Oh, you know, does that fit the rubric that we created for this book and all that?" And it wasn't really a very long conversation. It was just like, "Oh, wait, nothing is queerer than being separated, but still like in each other's life and still being family." So it made total sense. The question answered itself pretty quickly.
And yeah, I was going to say that there's like definitely no queerer experience than being friends with your ex, right? Like that's
here.
Yeah.
And I think my favorite thing about their particular story is that when we were talking to them, you know, like we had the whole conversation about, you know, a lot of this is about seeing roadmaps, right? And seeing maps for your future self. And one of those is separation. But I think one of the best details in that is that they still see each other as family. They still see each other as kin. They are actually still legally married because neither of them can imagine like the things that are your next of kin do for you, those like life and death decisions, the first phone call if something happens. For them, they're still that person even though they're separated. And I just love that. Like how the kind of flexibility of love in that way. I thought that was really cool. So
yeah, I absolutely loved that. And it kind of leads me very well into another one of my questions, which is that this book is about queer joy, but a lot of these stories also feature some, you know, tough realities about what it's like to grow up queer without any positive role models in your life, or, you know, to have difficult experiences as a result of that. So I was wondering how you have created this positive tone for the book while still honoring these people's kind of sometimes more difficult stories.
Ooh.
It's an interesting question. I think that part of it was just the way that we centered the interviews. It was so much of it, like the kind of deeper, more traumatic parts of their stories were fundamentally about their journey to where they were now. And so I think by like being able to share that, you know, because we had no interest in like whitewashing the harder parts of growing up queer, and especially growing up queer several decades ago, like that reality is a part of all of these stories, but also that the change in circumstance is fundamental to that story too. Like the fact that they grew up and they found each other, and they, what they found their families, and whatever found family they had, whatever, repaired those relationships after the fact, whatever it was. I think that the hardest parts of those stories were a part of, it's a journey story. And that's, I think, why it was easier to keep that joyful, because we kind of knew where it ended. I don't know. Billie, do you have any thoughts on the matter?
That's a really great way of putting it. Yeah. I don't actually have anything to add to that.
Well, I mean, I do think a lot of it also has to come from the photography, because the photography was so joyful, and like it really centered, these people. Like you could see love radiating out of these photos. I felt that. And so like I wouldn't underestimate the part that photography played in, centering the queer joy.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of that was due to how we approached the photo shoots, which was putting the ball in their court in terms of deciding where the shoots would happen. We wanted to make sure that they would pick a place that reflected the world they built together. So, it kind of giving a subject that home court advantage. I don't know why I'm making so many sports analogies. Apparently that's a thing I do. But yeah, like kind of, photographing these couples in an environment where, it's a reflection of the world they built together. That's only gonna, I think, result in joyful imagery. It's, I think world building is such a part of the queer experience. And all of these couples did have such robust and dynamic worlds built together. And I don't know, I'm still kind of in awe of how open all the couples were with sharing that with two complete strangers. Mm-hmm. Most of the photo shoots were a half a day long. That is extremely unordinary for photo shoots, especially like editorial photo shoots. Usually you're lucky if you get an hour with a subject. A lot of times you have a half hour, or if it's, kind of in a more rushed environment, you'll get like 15 minutes with someone. So the fact that, all these folks were like, yeah, sure. Half a day. Okay. In my home. Sure. Okay. It never ceased to amaze me. It was really, really special. And I think it gave a lot of like color to Hannah's text as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like
it did, yeah. Being able to spend that time with them. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. But like you would do the interviews and then, over Zoom, and then, either a couple of months to a couple of years down the line, we would do the photo shoot. And yes, actually like being in a room with someone and spending time with them and getting those little interactions that you otherwise wouldn't have seen or whatever, I think added a lot of color to your copy.
It did. Yeah. I think that, that was the reality of starting this during lockdown, is that all of our first contact with everybody was over Zoom. And so we did these interviews over Zoom, and we sort of got to know each other, and it was recorded. So then like Billie could look at it and kind of feel like she got to know them a little bit. But then, that meant that like that half day of a photo shoot was such a gift, being able to like really spend time with them and get to know them. And I think it really brought the whole book to life.
Yeah. Absolutely. I was actually going to ask about how you allowed the couples to choose the location of their photo shoot. Do you have any like location that for you just stands out the most, that was the most memorable, or the best, photo shoot that you did?
Oh, the best photo shoot that I did. I would say one that stands out to me was photographing Jenna and Mackenzie. I had been a fan of Jenna Gribben's work. She's, for those who don't know, is an incredible painter. And her wife Mackenzie is an amazing musician who performs under the band Torres, under the name Torres, and is also Jenna's muse, is the subject of almost all of her paintings. And we met at Jenna's studio, and like having been a fan of her work for so long, and then to like be surrounded by her paintings. I'm not often starstruck, but like I was starstruck not by them, but like by the paintings, because they're larger than life. Like, I mean, those two that were in the studio, what were they, like 9 feet tall or something like that? They were huge. And just like as a photographer, walking in and having like a skylight, like diffused light lit studio, I was just like, yes, this is so perfect. Yeah. And so that was one that really stood out to me because just visually it was so arresting. How about you?
I mean, I think we actually camped with one of the couples, which is extremely gay. So Molly Knox Ostertag and Eddie Stevenson, both of them work as like cartoonists and animators, and so their house is so much a place of work for them, and so they had chosen like as their a representation of their world building, to go camping. And as we were planning it, they're like, oh, well, do you guys want to just camp with us? Like we're booking a campsite. and so we went to LA and camped for a night in the sort of desert. It was beautiful. And that one it was such a unique shoot. It really stands out.
Yeah, for sure. I actually have a bonus question just for me personally. What was it like to be in the absolute genius presence of the one and only Andy Stevenson?
Incredible.
Because that was like the one name that I knew. I love She-Ra. And so
amazing.
when I saw his name, I was like,
yeah. Yeah, and he was just like casually telling stories from like the production of She-Ra, and I don't know about you, Hannah, but like I was like really trying to play it cool.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, no, that's an interesting story, and I'm just like fangirling internally screaming the whole time.
That's how I felt even just reading it. I was like,
yeah.
Like just all of the like casual She-Ra drops.
Yeah. It's like the two of them, like they are just like the sweetest human beings, and like immediately it was just like, oh, it just felt like a hang. It was great. But it was only like when he would just like casually like mention something about Cheetara that I'd be like, oh, right.
Yeah, I was blown away. I loved reading about it so much that it got me like I had to watch She-Ra again. I started to binge watch it.
Nice.
So that's what I took away from this book. It's probably not what you intended, but my takeaway was I have to watch She-Ra again.
That's a great takeaway from this book.
Yeah, no, that's solid. Yeah, that's awesome.
So you've talked a little bit about like a lot of these interviews occurred during lockdown. Some of these photo shoots happened in 2021, and obviously it's 2024 now. So it seems like you went on quite a journey to get this like book to be a reality. Can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, slow moving train. Books are a slow moving train. We both come from the magazine world where deadlines are like, everything had to happen yesterday. So I think that was kind of a really big adjustment for the two of us.
Yeah.
Like the scope and the scale of things are very different, but also the timeline of everything was like super, super different.
Yeah. And we had a COVID related delay as well, because it was there was that moment in time where production slowed down on everything. And so we had I think this was supposed to take 2 years, and instead it took 3, which worked out really well because there were some people that we never would have had in this book had we not had that extra year. So there were people that either became a couple in that year, or just like came onto our radar in that year. So I think, I was really grateful that we had that extra time. But yeah, I think that the time, like the speed at which book publishing moves is so different. Billie and I met at Rolling Stone. We both worked there for many years. And so we're used to, at one point, an every other week publication cycle and then a monthly publication cycle, which is very, very different than 3 years. Big change. and and then, yeah, I think also just it was just us for most of it. And that was a huge adjustment. We're used to having handful of editors involved on a project and a managing editor telling you when things are running late. All of these things that are just, it was a really, really different process from our previous experiences.
Yeah, I'm sure, because I imagine in the magazine editorial world that once you submit it, it's kind of done for you, right?
Yeah, both of us worked in-house at Rolling Stone, so we were very involved in the publication cycle, but it was once it goes to the printer pretty fast.
Yeah.
So,
but with a book, I'm sure there's things that pop up, like choosing what font you want, and what color you want the cover to be, and which picture you want to be on the front, which I don't even know how you chose that part. That would have kept me up at night.
It was actually a really challenging but really fun process. We actually got to go down to Chronicle, which is in the Bay Area, our publisher, to look at them. We had them all, all of our possible, the designer had worked out all these possible versions, and so we got to lay them all out on a table and interact with them. It was really cool.
Yeah, I think, well, it was more like the choosing the design was what we agonized over the most. But once we knew that we were going to have a photo on the cover, there were kind of only a few contenders. It was pretty, I don't know, it ended up, maybe it's just because I love the cover so much, it in retrospect feels like it was the obvious choice. But I remember it being a pretty straightforward decision. Once we kind of went with that design.
Right.
It was oh, okay, it's got to be Foz and Andrea. Boom. Yeah.
I love the cover. I love the photo you picked for the cover. So I think it's a very compelling, very attractive picture that you chose. So I definitely think you made the right choice. But I think for me personally, I'd be is this telling all of the people that interviewed that this one was my favorite? I feel like that would stress me out.
Yeah. I was a photo editor for 20 plus years, so I've learned to be pretty shrewd with my decisions. You just kind of have to go with your where your eye goes first, and just trust that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, I was wondering, which of these featured couples would you say has had the most lasting impact on you?
Ooh.
Interesting. Lasting impact.
What I mean by that is if somebody, that you talk to, if they had something to say that you still think about, or advice that you've carried into your own relationship or something like that.
Oh.
Well, one thing that comes up a lot, one of the things that we reference a lot in our household is actually Annalie and Charlie Jane, who are both amazing writers. The chapter starts with a term that they use to describe each other, which is switch kicks. And they said, nobody in this relationship, nobody is a sidekick. Nobody is a full-time sidekick. We're both switch kicks. So, it's depending on what the other person needs, that we get to kind of be each other's switch kick at any point. And that's definitely, that word has become a part of our vocabulary in our house now.
It
Yeah.
gave a word to a thing we've been doing our entire relationship.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, because I really resonated with that section as well. And I was like, I feel like fortunately, Olivia and I have naturally had that, like, there's rarely a situation where both of us are stressed at the same time. Like we take turns, like having that, like being the person that's like freaking out, and then being the person that's like, it's gonna be okay. Like we switch back and forth. And for us, it was a remarkably like fluid thing that just kind of happened. That's always been that way. And I feel like realize how lucky I was to have that until I was reading that. And I was like, oh, I do that, but I didn't even have to put a name to it. And that was very fortunate. Like, I think I'm very lucky.
That's awesome.
I think another thing that really stuck with me is so I think Roxane Gay and Debbie Millman. Roxane Gay is the writer and columnist, and Debbie Millman is a designer. And their story of how they became a couple stuck with me for a really long time. Because Debbie Millman she came out late in life. And had been married before, she was on this very much on her own journey, and read one of Roxane's books and kind of fell in love with her through the pages of her book, and just like immediately upon like realizing that she, like, how special this human was, ardently pursued her. And not in a creepy way, but in a I know that this should happen and you're going to figure it out, so I'll be patient. And now they're married. And it was just this, like, the self-assuredness in someone who was recently out, had been on this like really complex journey of her own, to see someone just be like, no, that's you're it, and I know it, and you'll figure it out. I thought was a really kind of incredible thing to see.
Yeah, I feel like sapphics never have that level of confidence.
Very rarely.
Yeah. I don't think I could have done it. Like, I'd have been terrified.
No.
Just absolutely terrified. Like, most of the experiences I've had where, like, I've hit on another girl or another girl's hit on me, one of us would just run away. Like, like you're so pretty, and then just like run away.
Bye.
Like, it's honestly a miracle we find each other at all, let alone this like epic, like romantic story that they have. That really blew me away, as well as, like, man, the confidence. I don't think I could have done it.
Wait, so how did it finally work out for you and your partner?
We met in the time-honored tradition of Tinder.
Oh, excellent.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you can't really, it's harder to run away from your phone.
It's harder to run away from your phone. Yeah. Yeah, no, I believe the first thing I said, because I was the one that messaged first, so proud moment for me. And I think the first thing I said was, I love your overalls. And here we are.
Correct.
Tale as old as time. Yep.
So there you go. That's
Cute.
our love story in a nutshell. Not very exciting. Not nearly as exciting as the one that you featured in the book. Ours is very we're post-pandemic lovers,
You know what? There's enough drama in the world.
Yeah.
It's nice to have one thing that's like clear-cut, simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Plus, I feel like anybody who's under the age of 25, we don't introduce each other. Like, we don't introduce ourselves to strangers.
No.
We don't do that. We straight up do not do that. And the pandemic only made it worse. Like, it was already bad enough that we had like the social media tool, but with the pandemic, Yeah.
So
No,
it's
if I don't know your name, I'm not going to talk to you. That's just
totally unsocialized. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So Tinder was really the only option for us.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you crazy kids worked it out.
Thanks. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, I think you kind of already talked about it with the response to the last question, but would you say that there's anything that you have taken away from these interviews that's like strengthened your own relationship?
Um,
I'm going to be a little cocky and say our relationship was really strong going into this.
You know what? I can see that from you. I believe that.
But I do think that well, sorry, Billy, I think you were going to say something.
no, please go for it.
No, I think that it was it one of the things that I think was particularly fun about this was seeing all of the different, and I think that the switch kicks thing kind of speaks to this, is finding like hearing the like vocabulary that some people use for the things that like we all do in our like the little worlds that we build together, that like make your relationship work, like all of our little code words that you have to like explain how you're feeling about something, or when you're panicked, or when you like need to dip out of a situation.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's important.
Yeah, I think that it was fun to see how that reflected in other places and how consistent that was. It was really it was fun to see some of those things that like maybe we hadn't named in our relationship, but that were very well named and isolated in others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think like especially after the photo shoots, Hannah and I would always have like a kind of like decompression like moment after the photo shoot to just like reflect on how it went and what our takeaways were and all of that. And more often than not, with all of these couples, there was such mutual admiration between them. Like they just respected, but also just admired each other personally and professionally. And we always saw ourselves reflected in that.
Yeah.
And like that was a really kind of validating, but also just like a really kind of like feeling like, oh, like that's like that was really moving to see that. And we very much feel that way about each other. And I don't know, like it was just like a really fortifying thing to experience every time. And we both love working together so much. And like, not to be reductive, but like watching Hannah work is like the hottest thing in the world. Like, reading your writing and like watching you interview, and like I'm obsessed with how Hannah's mind works. Like she has such a brilliant mind. And to be able to like spend 3 years like in that very kind of like professional setting with them was just, yeah, I don't know. I have such a crush on you, dude.
I have a crush on you.
Oh, we're so gross.
I love it.
Yeah, and I think it was also like just being, I think it was kind of medicine to be around all of that like queer joy for as long as we were. I think that
God, yeah.
getting through, I mean, it was a rough, and continues to be, but those 3 years were not great years to be queer in this country. And so to be kind of very deliberately immersed in that queer joy was such a balm. And I mean, I don't know that was, I'm sure that was really good for our relationship, but I think it was good for like my soul.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So the subtitle of this book is On Love and Possibility. And I wanted to know what that meant to you.
Me?
Either one of you.
Yeah, we actually really labored over like the title and the subtitle because it felt really difficult to essentialize this book. And that I think was possibly just because we were way too close to it. But a big part of kind of the narrative like thread of the book is the importance of being able to see your like your possible future self, and that the more potential versions of your future you see, the more potential you feel you have in your life. There's a sociologist, or yeah, he was a sociologist who we spoke to for the book, who talked about this study that was done on queer kids in the 90s, and they actually couldn't imagine what queer adulthood looked like, because they hadn't seen examples of that. And so this idea of kind of, it's a psychological, like old psychological principle of, possible selves, is this like ability to project yourself into the future. And so I think the idea of, possibility is kind of baked into what we wanted this book to offer people. So
I love that. I love the subtitle, actually. I think it's a lovely subtitle. It was very compelling. So this is my last question. This is what I wanted to just kind of end the podcast on. And it's also kind of a personal question for me, which is, what advice do you have for young queer couples and newlyweds like myself?
Oh.
Ooh. Oh, man. Oh, I don't want to screw this one up.
No pressure. It's okay.
No. I mean, all the pressure, but that's good. This is a really good question. Do you have any notions, Murph?
Yeah. So we have a lot of young people in our lives, and I think that like for someone like you who's making the decision to like get married and really publicly celebrate your relationship, one of the things that I think, and we've seen this in our lives too, and we've seen this in the book, that it is, I think it will surprise you how impactful that choice is to the young people around you. That choosing to celebrate your queerness and your love and your commitment to each other in whatever way that is, in a public way, and in a way that invites people to share in it, is can change lives. And I think we saw that over and over and over again in this book. Yes. And I think that choosing to be publicly queer is still, to some degree, a brave and radical act, and just one of the coolest and most wonderful things that you can do.
Yeah, agreed. It's and also choosing to take up space as a queer person can sometimes enable other people to do the same, enable people to feel safe to do the same,
and to move into that space. You by taking up space, you make space.
Well, that's a really beautiful sentiment. And I think that I can think of no better sentiment to wrap the podcast up on. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me. Thank you so much for sharing this gorgeous collection with the world. I'm super excited to be able to have it in bookstores. And I believe it comes out, I should have said this at the top, but here we are. We're dropping it at the end. This comes out on May 8th, I think, right?
May 7th.
May 7th. I'm going to start that from the beginning. Thanks. So this book comes out on May 7th. And I really encourage any listeners to stop by a bookstore near you, preferably an independent bookstore, to buy this just absolutely incredible anthology and like read something joyful, because so many books aren't. And I think so many books about queer people, particularly nonfiction, aren't. So this is really important. And I hope that the audience and just the public in general enjoy this book and get as much out of it as I did. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. It's been such an honor.
Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, thanks. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up with my closeout for Make It Gay, which is stay gay and keep reading.
Hell yeah.